Oh, it's Australian based. Okay. Xinjiang genocide talk. No way. This person looks
And
like they
now
address
I'd like to
everything.
introduce Daniel Dumbrill, who is joining us actually from China. Daniel,
Oh,
you
he's
recently
based in
visited
China?
Xinjiang and spoke to all kinds of locals from the area and documented a lot of this on your personal YouTube page. And you've been doing a lot of work to uncover what is actually happening. I think the audience is eager to hear your remarks around this issue. So thank you so much for speaking with us and joining us today. I'll pass over the mic to you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that intro, and thanks for having me here today. Definitely, I made a trip recently to Xinjiang and started to post some things on my YouTube channel for everybody to see. There's a bunch of other stuff coming as well, and other experiences that would probably come out in a conversation format like this. Now, for today, I was originally planning on speaking about that recent trip to Xinjiang and talking about the things I saw. It was a great trip. I got to see a lot and speak to many people on my own. I spoke to not only people who had positive things to say, but also negative things about China and the government. But I found myself getting a bit burnt out. When you go to Xinjiang looking for evidence of a genocide and approaching it this way, eventually you get to a point where, to be frank, you start feeling like an idiot. When I went...
Xinjiang is huge, too. Like, I don't know, most of the Americans who accuse China of doing a genocide, I'm sure, like, could barely find China on a map, and they definitely couldn't find Xinjiang. It's like, they're the two of the biggest deserts in the entire world are in Xinjiang, and then the rest is, like, mountainous region. So, yeah, when like, the U.S. government says, there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang, it's like, which part, But I think that's part of the strategy of pinning a genocide on this giant mountainous desertous area without, really providing any kind of specifics outside of Adrian Zen's reports.
To Xinjiang, I didn't want to go in with any sort of a bias. I wanted to see if I could find something that perhaps I had not been looking for. I wanted to see something, I wanted to see the situation from the perspective of somebody who really believes there's a genocide going on in Xinjiang. And to accomplish that best, I reached out to multiple anti-China voices, one of whom could probably be considered one of the top 10 loudest voices on this matter. I won't mention his name because we did agree to keep our private conversations confidential.
Was it Adrian
Zen's? I collected
Zen's?
information from them on what to look for, what to ask for, where to go, asking for specific coordinates as well. And
this is so interesting. I've never seen a video on Xinjiang like this. Like I said, Xinjiang is so huge and they never give specifics on what's going on. And this person went to Xinjiang and then reached out to the largest anti-China voices and asked them where to go to find specifics about this. And yeah, we'll see what he says.
We'll look at Xinjiang from their perspective. At first, it was interesting to try and look at my surroundings from their perspective. And after a certain point, as I said, you start to feel like an idiot. Take, for example, being asked to check a children's bookstore, because apparently I won't find any Uyghur children's books. Not only did I find a wide selection of Uyghur children's books, and even a Uyghur translation of Henry Kissinger's book in the grown-up section, but if I wanted Chinese, simplified Chinese or English children's books, I had to go up to the second floor in a far-off corner to find them. I decided to film the children's book section, the Uyghur children's book section, and the Uyghur staff started shouting at me and saying, I'm not allowed to film. And I asked, is this some sort of a government rule? To which they replied, no, this is our bookstore rule. We don't want our competition having our layout and all of our book details. And I explained that I'm not from Kashgar and that there are rumors overseas that Uyghur children's books are not allowed, that they're banned. After the staff gave me a strange look, they said, okay, fine, in a way that seemed to express, okay, buddy, whatever you say, whispering after, probably whispering.
This is insane. I mean, I'm not surprised, though, because on TikTok now I have a bunch of, not a bunch, but a handful of people living in Xinjiang, Uyghur people, who will message me and tell me stuff like this. And, I always take it with a grain of salt, because you never know. It could be a bot account, It could be I'm not going to make a TikTok and be like, oh, look at these people who messaged me and said that, there's not actually this genocide or cultural erasure going on. Because the people would just say, oh, that's probably a bot from the Chinese Communist Party. But I'm not surprised to hear him say any of this based on all the research I've done and everything I've heard about it. But this is so incredible. And Carlos and I are talking. We're planning next summer, hopefully, a trip to China is one of our goals. And going to Xinjiang rather than going to Shanghai or Beijing is just way more expensive. So I don't know if we're going to be able to make that happen. Flying into Urumqi is just like way more expensive. But it would be so fun to like do something like this to like go around and investigate all the accusations against this region in China by the U.S. and by Adrian Zenz, this far-right Christian fundamentalist who is the one who is providing most of the sources about Xinjiang. And I really recommend like anybody really look into this issue, right? Because it is hard to understand how much the U.S. media lies to us and how well they are able to manufacture consent for regime change until you really dig into the details, right? Like, really digging into Venezuela for my senior thesis was what helped me understand that, like, there's so much fabrication in the U.S. media, like it blew my mind. Like they're not just changing small little details, right? They're straight up making things up and charging these people with things that aren't true. In the case of Venezuela, saying that their elections are fraudulent. Meanwhile, Jimmy Carter, a former U.S. president, said Venezuela's elections are some of the most highly monitored in the entire world. And then same thing with Xinjiang. When you find stuff like this, that most of the sources about the supposed genocide are coming from Adrian Zenz, a far-right Christian fundamentalist who said he wants to just, he's on a mission from God to destroy China. And then, his claims are checked by people in Xinjiang, and they're like, this stuff isn't true. Meanwhile, U.S. media has been taking these sources from Zenz and repeating them as if they were, objective fact, while not, reporting anybody like Daniel Dumbrell, who is in China, providing counters to the Zenz narrative. And you can see how insular the U.S. media is and how they can cook up these huge narratives, that are almost entirely fabricated. And, or not entirely fabricated, but based on things that are going on in reality that are just not on the level of what U.S. media is saying. So, like, with Xinjiang, like, it is fair to say it's, like, become sort of like a surveillance state or a police state. You have, heavily monitored. You have these re-education camps. But then, what's not told is that the U.S. Was funneling money into the East Turkestan Islamic movement, this extremist separatist movement who were committing, acts of terror and killing, people in the hundreds, literally. So China, kind of cracked down on that and turned it into a bit of a police state, and the U.S. escalated that into talks of genocide, which is, totally disconnected from the reality on the ground, if we are to believe, any reporters we can find who are actually on the ground there. So yeah, I mean, looking into these things specifically shows you how much the U.S. is able to cook up, or how insular U.S. media is, and the tactics they use for cooking these things up, and then... in relation to Xinjiang, here's a really good a resource as well, from Chow Collective. So if you take my advice and you start looking into this issue, I would start with this, and then just question everything you see, right? And then look at how many of the U.S. media sources about Xinjiang, right, of the corporate media sources, only cite like Adrian Zenz or other like U.S. backed outlets or non-governmental organizations. So yeah. Let's go back to Daniel Dumbrell. I'm enjoying this video.
Whispering to each other after that. These foreigners are really strange, reconfirming my feeling that I was acting like an idiot. The next step after
someone in the chat says the surveillance is really where I can't be empathetic towards China. Yeah, and I don't, any increased police presence or increased surveillance is not something you want to see as a leftist, right? Like, we're against, hopefully, the NSA, NSA spying and Edward Snowden, everything Edward Snowden released about the U.S. government spying on us. But, keep in mind, like I said, the U.S. was funneling money into this separatist movement in an effort to destabilize China through Xinjiang. And we've seen the U.S. do this multiple times, funneling money into the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the right-wing opposition in Venezuela, the right-wing opposition in Bolivia, arming the Contras and their paramilitary death squads in Nicaragua. One of their main tactics is finding an extremist group on the ground and then arming and funding them to try and destabilize that country. They tried to do that with China, and China responded by kind of turning that area into like a surveillance state. So no, it's not good, but the world doesn't work in black and whites, right? It doesn't work in morally good and morally not. It's like, it's, some things are just tactical, and yeah, having a surveillance state, I don't agree with it either. But also, maybe they wouldn't have a surveillance state if we, had a socialist revolution here in the U.S. and didn't have an imperialist country funneling money into extremist groups. So that's how I look at it. But yeah, I definitely understand how you can, why there's a critique of China there, and it's legitimate. It's legitimate till you start lying, right? It's legitimate till you say that surveillance state is, equal to genocide, because that's not, and that's actually like really offensive to the actual victims of real genocides.
Graduating from feeling interested to feeling like an idiot was anger. When you start to meet ordinary locals and you realize that many of them have a small plot of family village land where they grow cotton, and when you hear stories of women whose family status increased and leverage in the family, especially in abusive relationships, their status went up because of their opportunities to work and improve their own personal quality of life. You suddenly start to realize after you hear these stories that the U.S. isn't out to help these people; they're out to destroy them. Their sanctions are designed to do what sanctions were always designed to do.
And this is what I was trying to say, and people on TikTok could not understand what I was saying, and it was frustrating because people were getting so indignant about it. Trying to be like, you're a genocide denier, you're a stupid tanky, why don't you just accept this narrative as true? And I'm like, because I don't think it's true, based on the research that I've done into Xinjiang. And then, shoot, what else was I going to say? I lost my train of thought.
There are opportunities to work, and...
the U.S. isn't out to destroy these people, right? So one of the people on TikTok a while ago had this had a U.S. congressman on his show to talk about Xinjiang, and the U.S. congressman got on this kid's show, and the guy was like 18, and he's just like, we're only going to sanction areas where we know there's forced labor going on, right? We're only going to sanction areas where we know there's genocide going on. When you looked into the details of the sanctions, it was just blanket sanctions on the area of Xinjiang, on the area where the Uighurs have their autonomous zone. So it's like you're putting these people that you're trying to help under sanction regime. Like this guy said, they've got jobs that involve exporting commodities, and the U.S. is holding them under sanction, which is going to put the Uyghur people, it's going to increase their level of poverty. It's going to make it harder for them to make money and create value and develop themselves. So the idea that the United States cares about Muslim people should be ridiculous on its face, given the actions of the U.S. in the Middle East over the past few years, and given what the U.S. has done in trying to destabilize basically every Muslim majority nation on the planet at some point within the last 70 years. So that should be ridiculous on its face, but then, we're going to help them by putting sanctions on the place where they live and work? How's that going to help them? What kind of mental gymnastics are you going to do to explain how that's going to help them? So, yeah. And this is the kind of stuff I've been saying since the beginning. I'm glad I found this channel now, though. I can use this guy as a source. And I have noticed, like, when I first started talking about Xinjiang, the reaction was ridiculous. Like, how much people freaked out and treated me like I was basically like a Holocaust denier, and like, we're just saying, you're a crazy tanky, you deny genocide to defend China. I'm like, I just, I'm looking at the information on the ground, and the accusations of genocide don't have a lot of evidence, a lot of concrete evidence. But nowadays, I see more people questioning the narrative, right? Including people I would consider like anarchists, kind of. So yeah, that's good to see.
You hear these stories. The U.S. isn't out to help these people. They're out to destroy them. Their sanctions are designed to do what sanctions were always designed to do, and what they've almost always accomplished: make ordinary people on the ground suffer and feel discontent. Couple that with America's delisting of ETIM as a terrorist organization, which is allowing them to raise funds and recruit now,
Yep, that's what I was talking about too. The East Turkestan Islamic movement.
Very obvious fact that recruitment in an environment of unemployment is far easier, as was observed in many other places, especially with Al-Qaeda's recruitment drive in Iraq after it was destabilized. To me, it's obvious what they're trying to do. This is exactly why there's a desperate attempt to sanction as many products as possible from Xinjiang, or factories who hire Uyghur, not because there's any actual solid evidence to support the forced or slave labor claims, but because they want to destroy the economies that Uyghurs rely on and scare other companies in China out of hiring Uyghur workers, fearing accusations that they'll receive. This is done to undo China's progress.
Right, and I went deep into the bill that Congressman Jim McGovern was proposing to put sanctions, and all it was doing was literally like targeting places where Uyghur people work. right, and saying, it's all forced labor, so we need to sanction everywhere where Uyghur people work and force companies out of that region, put pressure on them to leave that region. It's like, that's people's jobs. That is people's livelihood. That's people's living. And you have all these indignant Americans calling people like me who are questioning this narrative genocide deniers while being like, yeah, sanction the Uyghurs. Like, you guys are idiots. You fall so easily into the State Department narratives, Everyone can be against imperialism in hindsight, right? Everybody can look back at the Iraq War and say it was bad, but when the U.S. is trying to cook up war towards China, who's able to see through the propaganda, right? Who's actually able to comb through this stuff, look at the sources, look at, what U.S. media is saying and where their sources are coming from, look at alternative narratives and make a decision that way. And always a decision that supports self-determination and countries' ability to develop themselves without interventionism from the U.S.
Most important successes they achieved in their anti-terrorism efforts. America's out to do the same thing they did in the last Cold War, try to achieve their geopolitical goals through terrorism. Destroying Xinjiang's progress and pushing locals back into poverty is not an unfortunate consequence. It's the actual target. While discussing his book, The Art of Sanctions, Richard Nephew admitted that sanctions were designed to destroy economies and specifically mentioned to drive up unemployment in the regions of target. Richard now works with President Biden. I'm still glad that I reached out to these anti-China personalities to take this approach.
Yep. The goal of sanctions, and it's so ironic that the U.S. tells us, sanctions are to, spread freedom and democracy. We're just targeting the bad guys with our sanctions. We're only targeting the dictators. This is what they say about Venezuela as well, and that's what, if I talk to Seabass tonight on Conscious Lee's show, that's what he's going to say about Venezuela, is that the sanctions are only on the bad guys. But, in reality, what sanctions do is they stop economies from exporting. They increase levels of poverty on the ground. And then, the U.S. will couple that with, propaganda campaigns and, funding and arming of right-wing groups on the ground to try and create discontent among the people with their government. Basically, in simple terms, starve the people so they get angry and help you overthrow the government they don't like. That is what the U.S. is trying to do. That's what sanctions are. So the idea that sanctioning Xinjiang is going to help Uyghur people is so ridiculous, And as this person's saying, the goal of sanctions is to get them to feel discontent, to get them angry at the Chinese government, also do propaganda campaigns, also allow the ETIM to develop arms and funding and provide them with as much support as possible, backing a right-wing group, and hopefully, that combination of factors will lead in destabilization and more problems for the Chinese Communist Party, or the Communist Party of China. Sorry. So this is all the goal of sanctions are, and you have to stop falling for this. If you're still falling for it, when the U.S. government or U.S. government officials are telling you that some kind of sanctions or some kind of regime change efforts are made to help some specific group, not to say it's impossible that they're telling the truth, but they haven't been telling the truth at all in basically every event that's gone on for the last 70 years. The U.S. has funneled money into right-wing groups who carry out their geopolitical interests, oftentimes by destabilizing countries and launching them into poverty and horrible situations for the people on the ground. So, don't fall for it, y'all.
A firm believer in the idea of deliberately seeking out information to prove your own conclusions or positions wrong. And that's what I want to briefly focus on here, especially because so many people have firmly made up their minds already. And therefore, many of those people...
And that's what's so frustrating, too, is since I've been talking about this, there have been times where I said probably, there's not a genocide happening. But that's, the most, sure I've gotten to myself. And usually, and this is true of... I'm just thinking about the TikTok world, but anyone like Adrian Antianoli or anyone who has expressed criticism of this narrative in the West about Xinjiang and this idea that it is a genocide, we've been, if there is a genocide going on, we want to know about it, right? Where is all the information? Where is all the stuff? We have skepticism because most of the information is coming from Adrian Zenz, this far-right winger. But if there's a real genocide going on, we want that information, right? Please give us that information so we can understand what's going on. The information hasn't been provided that shows proof, therefore we're still skeptical. Versus the other side, even on the left, they're like, you're all stupid tankies, you stupid genocide deniers, you're the same as the alt-right. It's like, how are you so sure, right? Have you been to Xinjiang? Have you seen what's going on? Like, why are you so sure of yourself? Why are you so confident in your own knowledge about a region in a country that you've never been to in your life, is what I don't understand. Why are you not approaching this, trying to steel man your opponent's arguments or trying to look at both sides of the argument and understand what's actually going on? It seems like some people have the ability to do that, and others would rather just scream on Twitter, right? And jump in with a chorus of voices screaming, tanky, tanky, screw China. And yeah, that would be easier. That would be easier than doing the hard work of investigation. But if you're not down to do the hard work of investigation, maybe you don't need to share your opinion. Oops.
Wouldn't even believe a single thing I said about what I experienced in Xinjiang anyways. In reality, what should really be going on, rather than having people continually trying to debunk outrageous claims, is the people making those claims should be expected to provide compelling evidence to prove it. But we're just not seeing that. This is why when the U.S. State Department lawyers...
I keep rambling on and on about stuff, and then this guy Daniel just repeats what I say, basically, in better words. We're just not seeing the presentation of real evidence, or, real evidence that proves that this genocide is going on. Therefore, we need to remain skeptical.
Were pushed on the topic, they're forced to admit there's no evidence to support the idea of a genocide in Xinjiang. And this is why the International Criminal Court doesn't feel the evidence is sufficient either. They probably see the circular nature of so much of this evidence. For example, creating the claim that the Uyghur population is being genocided through birth control. The first step is to get a witness testimony, no matter how filled with contradictions and critical holes, to say that they were forcefully sterilized, or more accurately, had removable IUD placements forced on them. Next is to create a deliberately misleading translation or translations of Chinese documents to look like family planning efforts targeted minorities more than anyone else, and add in a few creative assumptions. A quick side note, some of those testimonies actually even put Neria's fake 1990 testimony used to promote war to shame. Everyone also overlooks that many of...
Yeah, and one of the main ones that people point to as far as... This guy, Daniel, just said a lot of these testimonies from Uyghurs that claim there's a genocide going on put the Naira testimonies to shame. This testimony where the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador went on live television and said that Iraqi soldiers were taking babies out of incubators and leaving them on the ground to die. It was completely falsified, completely untrue, and the U.S. used it as justification to bomb Iraq back to a pre-industrial state in the Gulf War. So it was, blatant propaganda used to justify regime change, and he's saying some of these testimonies put the Naira testimony to shame. And if you haven't, like I said about looking into this issue and looking into Xinjiang, because it'll show you what we're talking about, right? If you don't understand why people are questioning these narratives of genocide. This is one of the main people, fleeing Xinjiang and asking and claiming that there's a genocide going on. Deep connections to the U.S. State Department for a very, very long time. And actually, there are videos of people meeting with Rushan Abbas's family in Xinjiang and showing them what she's doing, and her family starts crying because they can't believe that she's lying about their country like that, which is really, really crazy video. I don't know how to find that video even, but it's crazy. And yeah, if you look at, this is one of the main activists, and this is one of the main people pushing this idea. And they're deeply, deeply connected to the U.S. State Department, and they have been for years. So you can look into their background a little bit, but, there are these people like James Ray on TikTok, who's like a soc dem from Purdue. ETIM even calls for ethnic cleansing campaign of all other minorities. Yeah, it's an absolute extremist group, and that's who the U.S. is backing. But James Gets Political, or James Ray, was saying, we need to believe survivors, and that's why Eddie's wrong about Xinjiang. It's like, yeah, I'm all for, believing survivors in various situations, right? Like, when someone comes to you with a story of something they survived, yeah, you don't question it right away. You believe them, and you try and comfort and help that person. But, when you have someone being propped up by corporate media, someone with deep connections to the U.S. State Department who's lived a life of wealth and power, right? And they're spreading these narratives about China at the behest of the U.S. State Department. It is okay to question those narratives, right? You don't need to blindly just believe those narratives because it's someone who potentially survived something traumatic, which is what James Gets Political was arguing, which is why he is a liberal who aids imperialism.
Of these witnesses are posing with East Turkestan flags. Problematic and revealing for a number of reasons that I won't get into today. Anyway, Thereafter, they search in a selective way for specific data that wouldn't normally support the idea of genocide anywhere else, but now they decide it does, because this is what they're hoping to find. They, for example, grab official Chinese government birth statistics and say, look at that remarkable drop. When someone points out that's fairly characteristic.
And this is how they extrapolate data for a lot of these things. So I was reading one of the genocides that Seabass accused me of denying and defending or whatever. I was looking into today for like a couple hours to get ready for my conversation with Conscious Lee. And there's the statistics, and it's the same with a lot of things that the U.S. Accuses other countries of doing. But all the statistics have been gathered by these ridiculous extrapolations from data, right? Like, oh, there was this level of population in 1930, and then in 1935 there was this level of population, so we can assume that 700,000 people died and Stalin killed them all. It's like, what? What are you talking about? Like, that is the most ridiculous pseudo-intellectual data gathering that wouldn't pass, in any scientific study anywhere, unless it's the U.S. accusing the Soviet Union of doing something wrong. But believe survivors who exited China legally through exit custom with their passport. There you go. How about that? She works for a mercenary company, I believe. What do you know? Yep.